Welcome to the deep dive. Let's jump right in. We're exploring something that I think kind of nags at a lot of us. How free are we really in our online lives?
Mm-hmm.
When you're lost down that rabbit hole, scrolling endlessly, or you feel that sudden urge, that need for the newest gadget,
Yeah.
is that really you choosing, or are there like hidden strings being pulled?
That's the core question, isn't it? The feeling of control versus actual autonomy.
Exactly.
We feel like we're constantly making choices. Click here, buy that, react this way. The sensation of choosing is powerful, almost undeniable.
Right. It feels real.
But what if that feeling is, well, part of the design? What if the boundaries, the walls of the garden we're choosing within are much tighter than we realize?
It's a bit of a head scratcher, that idea.
Yeah.
And there's this other challenging thought that our whole civilization, the very basis of it, is built on a kind of trade-off.
Ah, yes, the
Uh,
foundational pact, so to speak.
We give up some basic primal stuff,
Mm-hmm.
instincts, desires,
Mm-hmm.
in return for order, for security, stability.
Yeah, it's a provocative framework, certainly. The idea that society's rules, its laws, its ethics, even just customs, they represent this collective agreement, often unspoken.
To keep things in check.
Precisely. To keep certain fundamental desires, certain energies under wraps. Think about how we're taught from day one what's okay and what's not. Socialization.
Yeah, necessary, obviously. Can't have chaos.
Essential for living together, absolutely. But it inherently involves, well, a significant amount of internal restriction. We learn to police ourselves.
Okay, and here's where it gets, I think, really relevant for today. The more we suppress those natural impulses, the theory goes, the stronger they get bubbling under the surface, right? Almost desperate for release.
That's the paradox. Increased repression can lead to stronger cravings for whatever's been lost or forbidden.
And then you look at something like social media. It feels almost perfectly designed to tap right into those hidden parts of us,
It does, doesn't it?
all while making us feel like we're totally in the driver's seat. Complete freedom of choice.
Well, the comparison to, say, historical methods of managing populations is quite striking. Think about the Roman gladiatorial games.
Okay. Big spectacle, entertainment.
Right. Huge crowds. People felt they were choosing to be there, choosing to enjoy the thrill, the violence.
Yeah, it was a major part of the culture. People were invested.
Exactly. But beneath that surface of just, entertainment, there was a deeper function at play.
Controlling the masses.
In a way, yes. It channeled the population's aggression. Instead of that energy turning towards, say, rebellion or challenging authority.
It got funneled into the arena. Controlled violence.
Precisely. So you have this feeling of freedom. I choose to be here, I choose to watch, but it masked this underlying mechanism of social control, redirecting energy.
Huh. Okay, I see the parallel you're drawing. So when I'm scrolling through Instagram or TikTok, am I in a modern coliseum?
The analogy, I think, holds quite a bit of water. These platforms deliver a constant stream of curated content designed to hit our emotional triggers.
Fear, envy, desire, outrage.
Yeah.
Yeah, you see it all.
And we feel we're making choices. I'll watch this, I'll skip that, I'll like this, comment on that. That sensation of agency is very strong.
But behind the curtain, the algorithms are, well, they're learning us, predicting us, right? Nudging our behavior.
They absolutely are. It's a feedback loop. Our suppressed instincts, the need for validation, the fear of missing out, maybe even latent aggression, they fuel our engagement.
And our engagement trains the algorithm to get better at, well, keeping us engaged.
Exactly. Keeping us scrolling, clicking, reacting. The feeling of autonomy is compelling, but it often hides the sophisticated engineering underneath it all.
Okay, this raises a huge question then.
Yeah.
What about morality, our sense of right and wrong? How does that fit into this picture of suppressed desires and maybe hidden control?
Morality, from this perspective, is fascinating. It's this complex societal tool. On the one hand, absolutely essential. We need it for peaceful coexistence, to navigate social life without, constant conflict.
Sure, rules of the game.
But that order comes at a price. The price is the repression of those fundamental instinctual drives we talked about. The superego, that inner voice, our conscience.
The little angel on your shoulder. Or maybe the judge.
Perhaps the judge is more accurate.
Yeah.
It's essentially the internalization of society's moral code. It's constantly judging, evaluating, restraining our impulses based on those learned rules.
So when I make a moral choice, am I just playing out these internalized rules? Like, is there less independent reasoning than I think?
It's likely an interplay. Conscious reasoning matters, of course. But the foundation, the bedrock of our morality, is built on these internalized norms. And here's the kicker. This moralization, this process of internalizing rules, it doesn't actually eliminate our base instincts. It just pushes them down into the unconscious.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Not quite. They fester, and when these repressed desires eventually surface, they can come out in, well, distorted ways. Addiction, obsession, sometimes even violence.
Can you give me a concrete example? Like an instinct we repress and how it might pop up sideways?
Sexuality is a prime example. What Freud termed libido, our fundamental life and sexual energy. Most societies heavily regulate its expression right from childhood.
Yeah, definitely. Lots of rules, spoken and unspoken.
Certain desires, certain acts are labeled taboo, unacceptable. We learn to suppress those parts of ourselves. But that repressed energy has to go somewhere.
So where does it go?
It can get channeled into socially acceptable pursuits that seem unrelated. Maybe an intense focus on career success or accumulating wealth, or even strict adherence to religious dogma. These can become substitute gratifications, unconsciously fueled by unmet, repressed sexual needs.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot to chew on. What about consumerism then? That constant drive to buy, to acquire.
Modern advertising is a masterclass in exploiting repressed desires. Think about it. Products are rarely sold just on function.
No, it's always about the feeling, the image.
Exactly. A car becomes a symbol of power, status, maybe even virility. Perfume promises allure, conquest. Luxury goods signal worth, belonging. These ads bypass our rational thought and speak directly to those buried longings.
So consumerism basically runs on harnessing our repressed stuff.
It thrives on it. It offers these symbolic substitutes, these little hits of temporary relief that mimic the satisfaction of deeper, often unconscious desires.
So buying that shiny new thing, I might think it's just, I want that, but it could be me trying to scratch an itch I don't even know I have.
That's the idea. And in seeking that temporary fix, that fleeting illusion of satisfaction,
I'm kind of willingly plugging myself back into the system that created the itch in the first place, giving up some freedom for the illusion.
it's a powerful cycle. Desire, symbolic fulfillment, temporary relief. Then the desire returns, often stronger. It keeps the wheels turning.
You mentioned aggression earlier too, Freud's thanatos, the death drive, alongside eros, the life drive. How does repressing aggression work in society?
Aggression, like libido, is seen as a fundamental human tendency. Eros drives us to connect, create, build. Thanatos leans towards, well, destruction, breaking down, chaos.
So society has to manage that too.
It has to. It tries to channel aggressive energy into acceptable outlets. Competition in business or sports, productivity, even, self-defense. Healthy channeling.
But what happens when it's repressed too much? When there aren't enough healthy outlets?
Like other repressed drives, it doesn't just disappear. It can fester. It can build pressure internally and then erupt unexpectedly, maybe as displaced anger, self-sabotage, or finding outlets in, say, online trolling or extreme ideologies.
So things like violent movies, video games, intense sports.
Yeah.
Are those society's pressure release valves for aggression?
They certainly can function that way. They offer control environments to experience or witness aggression vicariously without, real-world harm, usually.
But there's a downside.
The potential downside is that it might let us off the hook. We get our release via the screen or the game, but we don't confront the root causes of our anger or frustration, maybe personal issues, maybe societal injustices. The system kind of absorbs and neutralizes the energy.
It really sounds like people in power, governments, corporations, maybe even cultural influencers benefit from this whole dynamic, whether they realize it fully or not.
There's certainly an argument for that. Those in positions of authority often have an intuitive, if not explicit, understanding of how managing human instincts works. Repression creates needs, moral codes foster obedience, unmet desires generate demand.
So politicians using fear.
Or corporations exploiting envy and desire.
Or maybe even religious institutions using guilt.
These are all ways that, consciously or not, tap into these fundamental psychological dynamics to maintain structures of control or influence.
Okay, but hang on. We do have some agency, don't we? We vote, we protest, we argue online. Aren't those real expressions of freedom?
They represent a level of freedom, absolutely, a perceived autonomy. But true freedom, from this Freudian-inspired viewpoint, requires something deeper.
More than just casting a ballot.
It requires awareness, not just of the external forces trying to influence us, but also the internal ones. Those repressed desires, those internalized rules, the superego whispering in our ear. These shape our thoughts and actions in ways we often don't recognize.
So voting is important, protesting is important, but they don't automatically mean I'm free from my own internal baggage.
Exactly. The ability to perform these actions doesn't necessarily equate to liberation from those deeper, often unconscious constraints. The bondage, if you want to call it that, is often incredibly subtle. It's pervasive, and we often mistake it for freedom precisely because a significant part of it originates within us.
Which brings us to this idea of voluntary slavery. How do Eros and Thanatos, these big drives, actually weave together to shape power, morality, our very identities?
It's an intricate dance. Let's bring back sublimation. Remember, it's transforming those raw energies, Eros especially, but sometimes Thanatos too, into socially acceptable forms.
Like art, science, religion, things society values.
Right. It seems like a win-win. The individual finds an outlet, society gets something constructive.
But you hinted it's not quite that simple.
Because sublimation, while creating amazing things, doesn't actually resolve the underlying repression.
Yeah.
It just puts a socially acceptable mask on it. The energy gets redirected, not fundamentally dealt with.
Can you give another example of that?
Yeah.
How it plays out?
Let's look at the Renaissance again. Incredible art, science, yes, but also a time of pretty strict social and sexual codes, right? You could argue that the sheer intensity of, say, Michelangelo's work, the power, the torment, the beauty was fueled in part by sublimating powerful emotions, maybe sexual tensions, maybe conflicts that couldn't be expressed directly in that society. The art became the channel.
So the masterpieces weren't just about genius and skill, but also a kind of psychological release for the artist and maybe for the people looking at it too.
That's one way to interpret it through this lens, yes. And fast forward to today, modern capitalism, as we touched on, is arguably built on sublimating desire through consumerism.
Advertising selling us symbols, not just stuff.
Precisely. Tapping into repressed needs for love, status, meaning, and offering a product as a temporary symbolic substitute, that fleeting pleasure from buying something new, that sublimated eros, arguably. A quick fix for a deeper, unmet longing.
Okay, that clicks. Now what about Thanatos, the destructive drive? How does that get sublimated?
It finds outlets too. Think about extreme sports, pushing limits, flirting with danger, or highly competitive business environments, kill or be killed, metaphorical corporate warfare, even perhaps in our fascination with true crime or disaster narratives.
So we engage with destruction, but in a controlled, maybe symbolic way.
It allows us to touch that edge, to engage with those darker impulses, but within boundaries. Again, the question is whether it truly resolves anything or just redirects it temporarily.
And you said earlier that if Eros, the life drive, gets repressed too much, Thanatos can actually become stronger? How does that work?
The idea is that if life-affirming impulses, connection, pleasure, creativity are constantly stifled, denied, shamed, well, that vacuum can be filled by destructive energy. Think of very puritanical or overly rigid societies.
Where everything fun is forbidden.
Essentially, yeah. When the expression of life, love, joy is heavily suppressed, you can sometimes see an increase in paranoia, scapegoating, harsh punishments, even violence. The stifled life energy makes way for destructive tendencies.
You mentioned the Salem witch trials before. Is that the kind of thing you mean?
It's a stark historical example, yes. Extreme repression, particularly of female sexuality and agency, combined with a pervasive atmosphere of fear and judgment. It arguably created the conditions for that explosion of paranoia and violence. Suppressed eros allowed Thanatos to run rampant, masked as righteousness.
Chilling. Can we see subtler versions today?
Well, let's consider something like online cancel culture. Now, holding people accountable is one thing, but the way it sometimes manifests...
The pile-ons, the intense shaming.
Exactly. You could argue that sometimes beneath the surface of moral outrage, there's a release of pent-up aggression, frustration, anger, looking for a target. It gets channeled into this socially sanctioned form of attack, often under the banner of moral superiority. It's a modern example of how repressed Thanatos might find an outlet disguised as something else.
Okay, and the superego, that inner critic, is key to keeping us in line, right? Making us voluntarily obey.
Absolutely central. It's the voice of internalized authority, parents, society, culture. It judges us relentlessly against its standards, triggering guilt and shame when we fall short.
So we punish ourselves internally.
Which makes external policing less necessary, doesn't it? We become our own jailers, in a sense. That guilt is a powerful leash. We conform to try and appease the inner critic to feel good or right.
And we seek redemption through fitting in.
Which binds us tightly to this system, constantly seeking validation by meeting the superego's demands which often mirror society's expectations.
What's a big cultural example of this superego mechanism?
Religion, again, often provides clear examples. Rituals of confession, penance, seeking absolution. They work directly on guilt.
They ease the guilt.
But they also reinforce the whole structure, don't they? They constantly remind you of your flaws, your sins, the need for adherence to the rules to find peace. It's a cycle that keeps the authority structure and the internalized rules firmly in place.
Makes sense. What about a secular version, outside of religion?
The modern workplace is rife with it. Performance reviews, metrics, targets.
Constant judgment.
Exactly. They function as secular moral judgments. Am I productive enough? Am I adding enough value? It fosters anxiety, this constant low-grade feeling of maybe not being good enough. We internalize those corporate or professional standards, and our superego cracks the whip.
It sounds so negative, this superego. Just internal oppression. Is there any upside?
Well, from a societal viewpoint, yes. It provides the glue. Adhering to the superego's rules, which align with social norms, gives us a powerful sense of belonging, acceptance, security.
The trade-off again. Freedom for belonging.
It's fundamental. We sacrifice some individual autonomy for the comfort and safety of the group. You see it in ancient tribes, modern nations, corporate cultures, families, everywhere.
And that need to belong is just hardwired in us.
Seems to be. And fear plays a huge role. Fear of rejection, fear of punishment, fear of the unknown outside the group. The superego uses these fears to keep us compliant.
What about extreme cases, like totalitarian states? How does the superego work there?
In those regimes, the state basically becomes the externalized, all-powerful superego. It demands total loyalty, absolute conformity, individual conscience is actively suppressed or co-opted.
And people comply out of terror.
Terror, yes, but also sometimes out of a twisted desire to belong, to be on the right side, even if it means participating in horrific things. That's the banality of evil idea. Ordinary people doing terrible things because the system demands it, and their own internal compass has been overridden by the need to conform to that monstrous superego.
Terrifying. Okay, back to less extreme examples. Social media.
It acts like a digital panopticon, doesn't it? The feeling of being constantly watched, judged by peers, by strangers.
Leads to self-censorship.
Absolutely. We curate our online selves, carefully managing our image to avoid shame, backlash, cancellation. We sand off the rough edges, present a conforming version. In doing so, we voluntarily give up some authentic expression for perceived safety and acceptance online.
So this feeling of being constrained, not truly free, it really starts inside us. With that inner voice.
That's the core argument. The real chains are often internal. The superego polices our thoughts, our feelings, our desires, even when no one else is watching. That's why this voluntary slavery is so effective and so hard to even see, let alone escape.
Give me one more everyday example of these internalized standards.
Diet culture is a powerful one, especially for women, but increasingly for men too. Society bombards us with unrealistic body ideals.
Yeah, everywhere.
And people internalize these ideals deeply. They restrict food, exercise obsessively, feel immense guilt for perceived failures, often not because someone is literally forcing them, but because they've absorbed the belief that their worth, their lovability, is tied to achieving this specific physical form. The superego enforces the diet.
And this pattern just repeats. Career, relationships, parenting.
It seems to. Across so many areas, the superego sets up ideals, the perfect career trajectory, the ideal relationship, the right way to raise kids, the correct political views. We internalize these as benchmarks for our own worthiness.
And we chase them, often sacrificing what we actually want.
Often sacrificing genuine desires, unique paths, authentic connection, all for the approval of this internalized judge and the society it represents. And the critic is never satisfied, is it? There's always another hurdle.
So, is there a way out? Or are we just stuck in this loop of repression and internal judgment?
Well, the perspective we're exploring isn't necessarily about eliminating repression entirely. Some level might be needed for civilization to function at all. It's more about awareness.
Seeing the matrix.
Kind of, yeah. Recognizing the extent of it, the cost of it, both personally and societally. The real challenge is finding a healthier balance between instinct and society, desire and responsibility, self and other, embracing the complexity, really.
And what does finding that balance require from us?
Courage, I think, vulnerability, a willingness to question the stories we tell ourselves and the stories society tells us, to ask, who benefits when I follow this rule? What am I really afraid of? What desires have I buried? Recognizing the internal chains is the absolute first step to maybe, just maybe, loosening them.
Okay, but this leads to a really tough question. If civilization needs repression, and repression shapes us, is wanting freedom just another part of the trap? Is the desire for freedom itself a kind of bondage?
That's the deep paradox, isn't it? From this viewpoint, yes. Repression isn't an accident of civilization, it's the engine. Without it, morality, law, art, culture as we know them, they might unravel
Into chaos.
into something potentially terrifying, yes, unrestrained instinct, where the very meaning and identity we sometimes seek through freedom might be lost along with the constraints we resent.
So our consciousness, our ability to even think about freedom is part of the problem.
Our self-awareness creates this split, doesn't it? We
Yeah.
see our limits, we realize how little control we might have, and that very desire to be free could stem precisely from the discomfort of those limits, the pain of repression itself, a reaction born from the constraint.
And all our societal structures, laws, norms, governments, they're just mirrors of this internal conflict.
You could see them that way. Civilization is a projection of our collective psyche. Laws reflect the superego's rules. Rebellions and revolutions reflect the other's desires or the ego's attempt to mediate. It's an ongoing internal drama played out on the world stage, maybe never reaching a final curtain.
Can you give an example of that cycle, where striving for freedom led back to constraint?
We talked about the sexual revolution. Liberation from old restrictions, yes. But then came new pressures. Commodification of sex, performance anxiety, maybe a different kind of emptiness replacing the old guilt. Freedom from one thing led to new, subtler forms of unfreedom.
It feels like every step forward has a shadow.
That's the pattern often highlighted. Political revolutions aiming for liberation often end up creating new forms of control, new elites. Technology promising freedom leads to surveillance or addiction. Spiritual movements seeking enlightenment can become rigid dogmas. The drive for freedom seems tangled up with the drive for control.
So if absolute freedom within society is maybe impossible, why do we keep chasing it so hard?
Perhaps because desire itself is never static. It's restless. Satisfy one longing and another pops up. Like sublimation, the energy just finds a new channel.
So the pursuit of freedom is itself a kind of sublimation.
That's one way to frame it. It channels our discontent, our yearning for more, into narratives of progress, liberation, self-improvement. It keeps us striving, engaged within the system, even as the ultimate goal might always recede. Every apparent step towards freedom might reinforce the underlying dynamics in a new way.
So the chains, there was both our prison and, weirdly, what holds us together, what makes us human in society.
That's the core paradox, essential for our existence as we know it, yet perpetuating the cycle. It's the condition, perhaps.
And becoming aware of all this, does it help or just make it worse, knowing you're complicit?
Awareness definitely deepens the entanglement in a way. It forces you to see your own role, how your choices, your desires, your very striving for freedom might reinforce the system. You're both victim and perpetrator, constantly.
So that voluntary giving up of freedom, it's not one big decision, it's just living.
It happens in the breathing, the wanting, the participating. Freedom isn't a destination you arrive at. It's this constant negotiation between you and your ideals, your desires and your denials, you and the collective, always shifting.
Okay, so as we wrap up this pretty intense deep dive, what's the final thought you'd leave someone with? Someone sitting here now wondering if they're free or just, playing a part.
I'd invite you, the listener, to really sit with that question. In your own life, your own choices, big and small, are you truly the author? Or are you reading lines from a script you didn't write? Where do your deepest desires really come from? What forces, internal and external, shape your path? Are you master of your fate, or are you moved by currents you barely perceive?
No easy answers there.
None at all. But asking the questions, living with the questions, that's where the exploration lies. And maybe, just maybe, the biggest illusion isn't that we aren't free. Maybe the biggest illusion is that we're alone in this. These chains, these bonds we've discussed, they connect us all. They weigh us down, yes. But maybe, in ways we don't fully understand, they also lift us up together.
A powerful place to leave it. We've certainly journeyed into some deep and maybe unsettling territory today, exploring this paradox. Seeking freedom within a civilization built perhaps on repression. It definitely leaves us thinking about that balanced security versus autonomy and how our own everyday choices play into that whole dynamic. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.